What is going on, my Heck versus Hellions? Welcome and welcome back to another episode of Heck versus Hell, where the truth we always tell. Welcome, peace and blessings. I hope you are all having a great, amazing day, week, month, year, whenever it is that you're hearing this by. And I hope we have already had the pleasure of meeting you in person if you're hearing this a little bit more in the future. Maybe not so directly immediately, just because we will be having more so events later down the line. But hopefully we've already had that pleasure if you are listening to this right now, wherever it is on any of the platforms we are so syndicated on. And I have also mentioned, still haven't got approval, but I'm going to mention it again. Do give us more places where you would want to hear us on. You know, if you have a preferred platform, if there's one more popular in your city so that you can easier spread the message. Give us some of those so we can continue to expand the syndication and reach as many wonderful souls as we can. But without further ado, as you can see, we are going to be talking about a topic that is not very talked about, and is defeating sin. And I say it's not very talked about. There's so many people that address sin. There's so many people that talk about different types of sin. There's so many people that get to this point, right? But a lot of the quote unquote pastors and ministers out here these days, they continue to tell you that we're imperfect, we're going to keep sinning, we're going to keep doing this, it's just going to happen, XYZ, whatever. And I actually had someone tell me that one time too. I said, hey, my goal is to be as perfect as God. And they kind of scoffed in my face and said, good luck. And you know, it kind of actually fueled me a little more. And I'm like, well, you'll see, you'll very much see, Mr. Man. But you know, that's a story for another day. However, there's so many people that say that, and a lot of it also comes from their own inadequacies. Now, I want you to very clearly understand and comprehend, it doesn't mean one person is closer to God than the other. It means that you are allowed more responsibilities whenever you do get to that point of further aligning yourself, right? Just like Christ. Christ had the greatest responsibility that, I mean, let's be honest, is very much of a difficult one at that. So you really have to be all in with God. Even the disciples, they still didn't have it as hard as Christ, but they were willing to let go of everything in their life, completely drop everything they had going on, even to where some dropped their own parents' funerals and followed Christ. You have to be that fully committed. And these people that are telling you, well, it's not going to happen, you're going to fail a couple times, they're not as committed as they think they are. That's what it goes to show, right? The fruits, you shall know them by their fruits. So that's not to say they're bad people, they're horrible people, don't ever listen to them again, just completely shut out their voice. Oh, hate on this person. It's the understanding of, hey, they still got room to grow too. You know, they're still human, of course. They're still on their own elevational journey as well. But defeating sin, the conversation comes from actually what we've been mentioning in a couple of the previous episodes before, and that I've been waiting to get on this topic about. We have to understand that, yes, there is so many times we sinned. Sometimes it is optional. Sometimes, you know, whatever it may be. Sometimes we feel like we have no other option. Sometimes we're just testing it out, whatever it is. However, we have to know that in our belief system is where we go and allow sin to take place, to take roots. It starts off as a seed, and that seed starts off as a thought, right? The thought enters as a seed, and it's up to you whether you let that seed in and allow it to fester and grow. Because if you look at after the Last Supper, it said that Judas had the thoughts come into him through the devil. It wasn't a point of, oh my gosh, Judas got possessed, or just out of nowhere, something took control of Judas's hands and mind, and he went that way. No, it started off as a thought. So everything starts off as a thought. That's one of the principles of one of the most successful books that all these people out here, all these financial gurus and everything, people that are in a lot of the self and personal development space talk about is Think and Grow Rich, about starting with a thought, becoming reality. And these principles are ultimately from God, right? They just go slap a different name on it and boom, it's ours. Take God out of the equation. Haha, we did it. We created fire, yet, God provided all the elements for us to do that. So in everything, we got to glorify God. But besides that, we have to understand that these things start with a thought. It's a thought process. We let it fester. And whenever we look at Christ, and I've said this before too, whenever we look at Christ's temptations, we looked at it as temptations. We looked at it as, okay, well, personally, I was like, well, this isn't fair because, that's God. He can't be tempted. God can't be tempted. It clearly says that in the Bible. God cannot be tempted. And it's not the point that God was tempted per se. It was that the thought was there to be had. Because in the same way we could say, oh, well, God was tempted with Job, right? With Satan saying, oh, well, hey, let me do this and he's gonna do this. I promise you he's gonna do this. That wasn't a temptation. That was actually an invitation by God. God allowed that to happen. That's why it happened. Okay, God was the one that initiated that conversation, said, hey, have you weighed my son Job? So we have to understand that the character of God is one. It's holiness. It's pure in all. It's no faltering. It's a firmness. And this is where a lot of the foundational talk comes from. This is where, the conversations that we have to have when it comes to being single-minded and not double-minded, right? It's all comes from here, having those foundations. God's character does not falter. That's why Christ wasn't even tempted, right? That's why I personally don't even consider it a temptation to God. However, we as people, we have a very malleable beingness that God created us to be. That's why whenever Christ came down as man, as mankind, it was to show us, hey, even though we are malleable beings and we can choose to do whatever we want and we have the free will to be whatever we want, I have the truth in me, so nothing else can come in. And I say that to say, of course, it sounds like, oh, well, that's what we have to have, the truth. We have to have the Bible. We have to have the Holy Spirit. We have to have these principles to understand what foundations we need to replace in our life. And it comes from an upbringing for sure. It comes from a certain way you were brought up, a certain way that you develop, a certain way that you were raised. It comes from these things, a certain way that you were cultivated. It comes from a lot of these factors, whether it be your environment, the parents you had, the friends you grew up with, the things you saw, whatever it may be. These ultimately give you that foundation because literally we're one of the only creatures that come in the world empty. And I say that in the sense of there are so many other creatures that have a lot more innate instincts than we do when we are born. Shoot, sometimes we come out and we have to have the doctor tell us to breathe, right? And that's why he goes, spanks us in the butt, and we're like, oh, okay, all right. We have to have that help. So it goes to show too, we are much more fluid in our beingness, in our identity, in what we can become, in what we choose to do in life, right? So in the same way, we have so many more variables when it comes to foundations, right? What we choose to follow, what we choose to believe, whether we believe monogamy is right, whether we believe killing is an act of just or an act of mercy, or just you're a pacifist, whether you believe alcohol is just a thing to have fun, or you believe that, oh my gosh, alcohol is so bad, it's directly from the devil, whether all these factors that could have took place as you grew up, right? And that is very true. We have to go and continuously grow and evolve, and spending that time with God, spending those prayers and dedicating the time to where it belongs is very essential, very important. But one of the things that people also don't realize and that they don't look at, and they choose not to further elevate and speed up the process, because God can do anything. He can go and just boom, you're changed right now. And I've seen so many different radical people that have those different factors of their being born again, right? There's some people that go and they're on the streets and they've been struggling with drug addiction for 15 plus years, and they go and they just radically have no longer an urge whatsoever to ever go back to that drug. And there's other people where they don't have that same privilege, quote unquote, and they have to actually fight it. In the same way, we are given different talents, different measures, so that we can fight certain things ourselves, so we can have the tools accessible ourselves, so we can desire that change to be closer to God. Why would God just say, okay, you're born again, now you're exactly like me? That's still taking away our free will, right? That's why the same way other people can have different gifts. Some people gifts of tongues, some people gifts of serving, some people gifts of evangelism, teaching, so many different things. It comes from our own journey to the alignment of God. And leading that to say, trauma is a huge factor of why, as mankind, we continue to sin as well. There are so many snap solutions, is what I'll call them. There's so many. This is why I don't like Western medicine that much, because they love to avoid the actual problem and try to target the symptoms. They try to treat the symptoms and hope that will cure the problem, right? With depression, for example, they go give you antidepressants. Boom, now you can't think, right? Now you're all dizzy and woozy, and now you can't think at all. Boom, you're cured. No, it's not how it works. You have to actually go and address the situation, address the problem. So, obviously there are so many advancements where some of the things like, oh, that's awesome. People are uncovering God's design and how he created it to be. Of course, I do have my own perspectives on it, but ultimately it is the root of the problem that we need to be on. A lot of trauma that we still have and still hold on to, it's not always easy to get rid of, right? There's so many things that are just so deeply marked on us that it's hard to elevate past. But you got to remember, whenever you get that type of marking, you're excluding and pushing out God, because in a sense, we don't trust what that purpose of that thing in our life was for. So, I've used this analogy once. I'm going to use it again, maybe three, four times. I don't know. Same way, if we go and we look at a dad that, an alcoholic father that went and he just beat two of his children, and that's all he did. He just drank, beat his wife, beat his children. One of the child was like, well, you know what? I'm just like him. I'm going to follow down the same path. He becomes a drunk. He becomes an alcoholic. Another son that goes and he's like, well, I will never touch alcohol in my life because I hated my father doing it, and I'm never going to do that for myself, and I'm never going to do that to my kids. Ultimately, down the line, hey, they made their choices, but that's both still trauma, right? One of them is doing it because he believes he's just like his father. The other one is doing it because of it. So it's still that instant in that situation that it's trauma that leads them to that. So we could say, oh, well, that guy that went and chose to not drink and ever touch beer in his life, he's a good person because he's not touching beer. Good for him, fighting against the chains. But ultimately, now he goes and he has children of his own, and he sees one of his child go and drink some beer, and his child gets a little bold and starts, slurring and back talking him a little bit, and he just snaps. remembering all those memories, thinking of his father, and he goes and ultimately beats his son to death. You think that's not trauma? You think it's not the same thing? I mean, it festers up. It's still trauma, no matter how you paint it. And it ultimately caused him to go and kill his child. And the other guy, he was living in sin the whole time through that trauma, just doing and following the same thing. Hey, beating on his wife, beating on his kids. No sin is different from one or the other, whether it be telling a little lie or going and just straight up murdering somebody. Of course, there are different levels, right? There are different things, of course, of understandings of how severe certain repercussions are and consequences, but it's still sin regardless. We're still going against the Father. So trauma is a huge point of sin. And I say this and express it very prominently as well, because here in America, if you're not from here, if you're not following all the things that go on in America, they have such a huge stigma when it comes to black people. And I say that with air quotes, right? Black people. They have such a mannerism where it's like, okay, now we have okay, that's really a conversation that we're gonna have to go on a whole different episode on, you know. But to sum it up a little bit, there's extremes of it. So there's some black people where they're like, "Whoa, I'm still scared of cops. I am so terrified of cops. I can't do that because I was raised looking at that way." And there's the other side of it, just like people in the streets where they're like, you know, screw the cops. We're gonna do what we want. We're gonna be as bold as we can, you know, but it's still trauma. It's still passed down trauma. You got that trauma from your parents, and now you're choosing to go one way or the other. Now you become so little and see yourself as so less that you don't become what you were created to be, or you go on the opposite side to where all you can do is amplify the sin that was done unto you. But ultimately, you are still etching God out. You are still choosing that lifestyle and choosing to live in the bonds of that trauma as opposed to growing and elevating past it to become a better person. It's not a point of colorism. It's a point of having that trauma and elevating as a human being and a spiritual being and a spiritual child of God. That is what we really need to be looking at and focusing on all the time. Stop breaking it up into these political groups. Stop coddling to these rainbow communities feeling. It's trauma that needs to be healed regardless of what spectrum you were on, regardless of what race, what ethnicity, what background, how old you are. It has no mannerism whatsoever. No matter what lifestyle you were in, no matter what life you came from, it doesn't matter. This is what you must focus on to fully elevate the proper way. Heal the trauma, and the sin will go away. Obviously, we can still choose to go and sin by choice, make a conscious decision to choose that sin, but so much of it comes from that trauma. Healing it is one of the things that nobody really talks about, that I have really never heard any ministers, pastors, anything really talk about. They talk about, well, change your perspective on it, look at it this way, let it empower you, but it's still trauma. No matter how you paint it, no matter if you want to use it as your own sword in your pocket to pull it out, huzzah, you're still holding the blade in your hand. You're not even holding the handle. It's still cutting you and hurting you, even if you're using it for your own empowerment, right? So that's what I want to leave with you today. I really hope this impacted you. I love each and every one of you as a human being, as the God created person that you were made to be. I love you all, and I hope you have a blessed day, night, morning, whatever time of the 24-hour period that you're listening to this on. And we will catch you on the flip side.